The first time Laurel Whitcomb stood at the door of Gray Hollow Ranch, she was not asking for love, respect, or even kindness. She was asking not to freeze. The Wyoming wind had chased her for miles, pushing dust and dry leaves across the trail like it wanted to bury every footprint behind her. Her brown dress was travel-worn, her gloves were thin at the fingers, and the little carpetbag in her hand looked too light for a woman who had nowhere else to go. She had walked most of the afternoon after the freight wagon that promised her a ride turned south without warning, leaving her with a crooked road, a bruised heel, and a sky turning the color of iron. By the time she reached the ranch house, evening had fallen hard. A lantern swung from the porch beam, knocking softly against its hook. Beyond the yard, a tired horse shifted beside the barn. Smoke rose from the chimney, then twisted sideways in the wind. Laurel lifted one trembling hand and knocked. Inside, something crashed. A baby began to wail. Then another small voice joined it, sharper and weaker, like a child who had cried too long and no longer believed anyone would come. Laurel almost stepped back. A woman traveling alone knew better than to push herself into another family's trouble, but the smell that came through the door was not supper, it was scorched milk. She knocked again, louder. The door opened with a sudden pull. A man stood there with a baby pressed against his shoulder and another child crying somewhere behind him. He was tall, broad from years of ranch work, with dark, tired eyes and a beard that looked like it had been trimmed in a hurry and forgotten after that. His shirt was half-buttoned, one sleeve damp with milk, and there was ash on the side of his jaw. He looked like a man who could break a wild horse. He also looked like a man who had been beaten by 2 hungry children and 1 burning stove. "What do you need?" he asked. His voice was rough but not cruel, just empty. Laurel glanced past him. A pot smoked on the stove. A little girl in a cradle kicked both feet beneath a thin blanket, her face red with crying. The baby in the man's arms had one tiny fist caught in his collar. A chair lay turned over near the table. On the far wall, 3 cold rooms stood open, stealing warmth from the kitchen like silent thieves. "I need shelter for the night," Laurel said. "Water if you can spare it, directions in the morning." The man's eyes moved over her carpetbag, her muddy hem, the windburn on her cheeks. "I don't keep boarders." The little girl cried harder. Laurel looked at the child, then back at him. "May I?" His brow tightened. "I'm not asking to take her," Laurel said gently, "only to quiet her." For a moment, the man did not move. His body stood in the doorway, but his face belonged to a man standing at the edge of a cliff, too tired to step back and too proud to call for help. Then the baby in his arms let out a thin, broken sob. The man stepped aside. Laurel entered the house. She set her carpetbag near the wall, pulled off her gloves, and crossed to the cradle. She did not snatch the little girl up. She warmed her hands near the stove first, then leaned close and spoke in a low voice, soft as a prayer. "There now, I know, the whole world got loud, didn't it?" The child hiccuped through her crying. Laurel lifted her carefully, one hand beneath the head, one arm around the little body, and turned away from the smoking pot. She walked slowly toward the porch door, not outside, just near enough for cooler air to touch the child's flushed face. The crying weakened. The rancher stared as though Laurel had done something impossible. "What's her name?" Laurel asked. "Ruby," he said. "And the boy?" "Jonas." Laurel nodded and kept walking in a small circle. Ruby and Jonas, good strong names. Ruby's tiny fingers curled into Laurel's dress. Her sobs faded into uneven breaths, then into silence. A few moments later, she was asleep against Laurel's chest. The rancher looked down at Jonas, who still fussed weakly in his arms. Laurel held out one hand. "He's hungry, the milk burned." "I know that." The words came fast, defensive, and full of shame. Laurel did not answer sharply. She only said, "Then let us start over." That simple changed the air in the room. The rancher heard it too. His eyes narrowed a little. "Who are you?" Laurel Whitcomb. Widow. Yes. How long? 2 years. Where are you headed? Laurel looked toward the dark window. Outside, the land had turned black except for the pale shape of the barn and the moving lantern light on the porch. She could have invented a place. Cheyenne, Laramie, a cousin in Montana, any lie would have made her sound less desperate. But she had run out of lies before she reached his door. I don't know anymore, she said. The wind pressed against the house. Somewhere above them, a roof beam creaked. The man shifted Jonah's in his arms. I'm Wade Mercer, this is Gray Hollow, my wife died last winter. He said the words with no softness, no story, no invitation for pity. They fell from him like stones from a wagon. Laurel lowered her eyes to Ruby's sleeping face. I'm sorry. Wade looked away. On the shelf behind him sat a row of jars with neat paper labels, each written in a woman's careful hand. Flour, beans, dried apples, baby cloths. The labels were clean around the edges but dusty across the centers, as if no one dared touch them and no one dared throw them away. Laurel understood grief like that. Some grief screamed. Some grief locked a room and left everything inside exactly as it was. Jonah's began to cry again. Laurel moved Ruby back to the cradle, then reached for the boy. Wade hesitated, but only for a breath. When he placed Jonah's in her arms, his hand brushed hers. His fingers were cold. Laurel settled the baby against her shoulder and turned toward the stove. You need fresh milk warmed slow, not boiled, a clean cloth, another blanket near the cradle but not over his face, and those doors should be shut before the cold takes the whole room. Wade's pride rose in his eyes. You giving orders now? No, Laurel said, I'm trying to keep your children warm. The answer struck him harder than any insult could have. He looked at the open rooms, looked at the smoke, looked at his son quieting against a stranger's shoulder. What do you want from me? He asked. Laurel swallowed. The honest answer frightened her more than the road outside. A place by the fire, she said, food enough to stand on my feet, and if you allow it, I can help with the children until the road clears. Wade's jaw tightened. Road may not clear proper once winter comes. I know. You asking to stay the season. Laurel looked down at Jonah's. His crying had stopped. One small hand rested against the hollow of her throat, trusting her without knowing her name. I'm asking not to be sent back into the cold tonight, she said. Tomorrow can speak for itself. Wade said nothing for a long while. The house was not quiet. The stove hissed. The wind worked its fingers under the door. Ruby breathed softly in the cradle. Somewhere in the wall, a loose shutter tapped like a warning. At last, Wade turned and shut the 3 open doors one by one. Then he took the smoking pot from the stove and carried it outside. When he came back, he did not smile, he did not thank her, he did not offer trust. He only pointed toward a small room beside the kitchen. You can sleep there tonight. Laurel nodded. And you don't touch the locked bedroom, he added. You don't go through my wife's things, you don't ask questions about papers, debts, or the barn ledger. I won't. If I decide you're trouble, you leave. I understand. Wade looked at the babies, both quiet now for the first time that evening. His shoulders lowered just slightly, as if his body had forgotten what relief felt like. Laurel warmed new milk while he watched from the table, too tired to help and too uneasy to rest. She moved carefully through the kitchen, not like a guest, not like an owner, but like someone who knew a house could be wounded too. She washed the burned pot. She folded the fallen cloths. She set the cradle closer to the stove, but not too close. She placed her own shawl over the back of a chair to block the draft until morning. Wade's eyes followed every small act. Outside, the wind grew colder. Laurel did not know yet that Gray Hollow Ranch was already failing. She did not know about the spoiled stores in the cellar, the weak roof above the pantry, the calves that would be born into a killing storm, or the neighbor waiting for the ranch to break so he could buy the land cheap. She only knew 2 children had stopped crying. And Wade Mercer, standing in his own kitchen like a stranger in his own life, knew something too. The woman he had almost turned away had brought more warmth into his house in 1 hour than he had managed to keep there all winter. But when Laurel opened the little room beside the kitchen, she found something on the bed that made her stop breathing. A folded child's blanket. And beneath it, hidden in the shadow of the pillow, a letter addressed in the dead wife's handwriting. Laurel stood in the doorway of the little room with one hand still on the latch. The room was hardly larger than a pantry. A narrow bed sat against one wall. A small washstand leaned slightly on uneven floorboards. A single quilt lay folded at the foot, faded from years of sun, but it was the child's blanket on the pillow that held her still. It was soft blue wool, carefully mended in 2 places, with a little white star stitched near one corner. Beneath it was the letter. Laurel did not touch it at first. She knew the weight of another woman's handwriting. After her husband died, she had kept his last note folded inside her Bible for so long that the paper had nearly worn through at the creases. Some things looked small on a table but carried a whole graveyard inside them. Behind her, the kitchen had quieted. Wade's boots moved across the floor, a chair scraped. One of the babies gave a sleepy sigh. Laurel stepped back and pulled the door partly closed. "You all right?" Wade asked from the other room. "Yes," she answered, though her voice came out thinner than she meant it to. She looked once more at the letter through the narrow opening. The handwriting on the envelope was neat but tired, as if the woman had written it with a weak hand. "For Wade, if I cannot say it myself." Laurel felt the words in her chest. She turned away. It was not hers to read, not tonight, not ever unless he placed it in her hand himself. She entered the kitchen again. Wade sat at the table with Jonas sleeping against one arm and Ruby curled in the cradle near the stove. His face had softened in the firelight, but only because exhaustion had rubbed the hardness down. "There's a letter in that room," Laurel said quietly. Wade's eyes lifted. The softness vanished. "I didn't open it," she added. His jaw worked once. "I know what's in there." Laurel lowered her gaze. "Then I'll leave it where it is." For a moment, the only sound was the stove breathing heat into the room. Wade looked toward the little room as if it had suddenly grown dangerous. That was Martha's sewing room before the twins came. She put things wherever she could reach them near the end. Near the end. He said it like a door closing. Laurel did not push. Instead, she moved to the stove and stirred the fresh milk. "Do they wake often in the night?" "Every hour some nights." "Together or one after the other?" Wade gave a humorless breath. "Both, if the Lord wants to humble me." Laurel almost smiled, but saw there was no laughter in him. "Ruby coughs when the air turns cold," he said after a while. "Jonas eats too fast and spits half of it back. I've tried every way I know." Laurel nodded. "Then tonight we keep the room warm and quiet, smaller. Babies don't need a whole house of cold air." Wade watched as she moved the cradle a few feet closer to the stove, placed a chair between it and the draft under the door and spread her shawl over the back. She checked the milk on her wrist, fed Jonas slowly, then paused him twice until he settled. Wade stared at the child as though someone had handed him a new language and Laurel somehow spoke it. "How do you know all this?" he asked. "My mother helped women when doctors were too far off. I learned from watching. Later, I worked at a homestead near the Sweetwater. 4 children there, one always sick, one always hungry, and one always falling off something." "Where are they now?" "Gone east with their aunt after the land sold." "And you?" Laurel looked into the milk cup. "I was not family." The words fell gently, but Wade heard the wound beneath them. He leaned back, careful not to wake Ruby. "You got no kin." "None close enough to claim me." "No husband's people." They kept his tools and sold the team. Said a young widow could find work easier than they could replace a wagon horse. Wade's eyes hardened, not at her, but at the kind of world that made such things ordinary. Laurel lifted Jonas to her shoulder. It was 2 years ago. I have eaten since then. That ain't the same as living. No, she said, it is. Something quiet passed between them then, not warmth, not trust, but recognition. Two people sitting in a house full of ghosts, both knowing what it meant to keep breathing after life had taken the chair beside them. Wade rose and took more wood from the box near the wall. Laurel noticed the box was nearly empty. Where is the woodpile? She asked. Back of the house. Covered. He paused some of it. She said nothing, but her eyes moved toward the wall, the open cracks near the floor, the 3 rooms he had finally shut. Wade followed her gaze. You see a lot for someone who just got here. I've learned to notice what winter notices. That made him turn. The sentence had not been proud, it had been plain. That was what unsettled him. After the babies were fed and settled, Wade showed her where to find a basin, clean cloths, and a flour sack she could use for a nightgown if needed. His awkwardness touched her more than kindness might have. A man used to managing cattle and fences had no idea how to offer comfort inside a house. When Laurel returned to the little room, the letter still waited beneath the blue blanket. She moved it carefully to the small table without turning it over, then laid the blanket back on the pillow. She slept in her dress with her boots beside the bed and her carpet bag within reach. Women without homes learned never to unpack too quickly. But sleep did not come easy. The wind slid beneath the door, the boards ticked in the cold. Once, Ruby coughed and Laurel sat upright before Wade even crossed the kitchen. She reached the cradle first. Wade stopped behind her, hair rough from sleep, eyes shadowed. Laurel lifted Ruby and held her close, turning the child so her breathing came easier. She hummed under her breath, not a song exactly, more a memory of one. What is that? Wade asked quietly. My mother used to hum it during storms. Ruby settled. Wade stood there for a long moment. Martha sang. Laurel looked at him, but he was staring at the stove. She had a voice that could quiet a room, he said. Not loud, just steady. After she passed, I tried singing to them once. His mouth tightened. They cried harder, Laurel asked softly. Jonas looked offended. Laurel covered a small laugh with her hand, but the sound escaped anyway. It was the first gentle sound the house had heard all night. Wade looked at her, startled. Then, against his will, a faint smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. It was gone quickly, but Laurel saw it. So did the house, perhaps because the next gust did not feel quite as lonely. By dawn, the fire had burned low again. Laurel rose before Wade. She did not enter forbidden places. She did not touch the barn ledger. She did not open drawers. She simply began where need was plain. She shut the parlor door tight and rolled an old flour sack against the gap beneath it. She moved the table nearer the stove, leaving room for Wade's chair and the cradle. She found a cracked curtain rod in the corner, tied a spare sheet across the kitchen opening, and made the warm part of the house smaller. Then she swept ash, warmed milk, and set coffee to boil. Wade came in from the back porch carrying an armload of wood, then stopped. The kitchen had changed. Not much, but enough. The cradle was no longer sitting where the draft crawled under the floor. The chairs formed a rough half-circle around the stove. The children were close enough for warmth but far enough from sparks. A kettle steamed gently. Ruby slept without coughing. Jonas lay awake, staring at the moving sheet as though it were the finest entertainment in Wyoming. Wade set the wood down. You rearranged my house. Yes. You ask before doing that where you come from. If a baby is cold, no. He studied her, half angry, half ashamed that he had not thought of it himself. Laurel lifted the coffee from the stove. If you want it moved back, I'll do it. Wade looked at Ruby's calm face. No, he said, leave it. That was the first victory Gray Hollow gave her. Not a spoken welcome, not a promise. Only 2 words and a silence that did not push her out. After breakfast, Wade prepared to ride the south fence. He stood by the door longer than needed, pulling on his gloves while watching the babies. "I won't be gone long. They'll be here when you return." His hand stilled on the latch. "You say that like it's easy." Laurel met his eyes. "It is not easy, but it is possible." Wade looked as if he wanted to ask something else. Instead, he stepped onto the porch. The cold took him fast, pulling at his coat as he crossed the yard. Laurel watched him through the window. Only when he was halfway to the barn did she see another rider on the ridge. A man sat on a dark horse beyond the cottonwoods, still as a fence post against the gray morning. He was too far away for Laurel to know his face, but close enough that she could feel him watching the house. The rider remained there until Wade disappeared into the barn. Then he turned his horse and rode off toward the north road. Laurel's hand tightened around the curtain. Behind her, Jonas made a soft sound in the cradle. Laurel turned back to the children, but the warmth she had built in the kitchen suddenly felt fragile. Because whoever that rider was, he had not come by chance. And he had been watching Gray Hollow long before Laurel opened the door. The rider on the ridge stayed in Laurel's mind long after he disappeared. She tried to tell herself it was only a neighbor passing through. Ranch country was full of men who watched smoke from distant chimneys, counted cattle that were not theirs, and measured another family's troubles by how low the barn roof sagged. But there had been something too still about him. He had not ridden toward the house. He had not called out. He had waited until Wade went inside the barn, then vanished toward the north road like a man carrying news. Laurel had lived long enough to know that trouble often came quietly first. She did not mention the rider when Wade returned near noon with frost on his shoulders and fence wire cuts across one glove. He came in tired, stamping snow-damp dirt from his boots, then stopped at the sight of Ruby sitting in Laurel's lap, chewing the corner of a clean cloth while Jonas kicked his feet beside the stove. Both children were calm. That alone seemed to unsettle Wade more than crying. "South fence needs 3 posts," he said, as if he needed to fill the silence with work. "One rail split near the creek. I'll fix it after dinner." "You mean lunch," Laurel said. He frowned. "Children eat at steady hours," she said gently. "Men should try it too." Wade looked toward the stove where beans simmered with a small piece of salt pork. On the table, Laurel had set bread, coffee, and a little dish of stewed apples. It was not fancy, nothing at Gray Hollow was, but it looked like a meal instead of something caught between chores. His eyes went to the jars on the shelf. "You used Martha's apples." "I used the jar already open." His face tightened, then eased when he saw the label still tied neatly around the glass. Laurel noticed, "I did not remove her writing." Wade took off his hat and placed it on the chair. "I didn't say you did." "No," Laurel said, "but you looked." He pulled out a chair slowly. "A man can look without accusing. And a woman can answer before being accused if she has spent enough time being blamed." Wade's hand paused on the chair back. The words had come out plain, not sharp, but Laurel wished she had swallowed them. She did not want to lay her old hurts on his table, not when he had barely allowed her a plate there. But Wade only sat down. After a moment he said, "Who blamed you?" Laurel fed Ruby a small spoonful before answering, "People who needed a reason not to help." That was all she gave him. Wade did not ask again. They ate in quiet, not warm quiet not yet, but a quieter kind than the night before, the kind that allowed breathing, the kind where a chair could creak without sounding like judgment. After the meal, Laurel carried the dishpan near the stove and began washing. Wade moved to take it from her. "You cared for the children all morning," he said. "Leave that. I can wash dishes." "I didn't say you couldn't." The two of them stood with their hands on the same pan, both too proud to let go first. Then Jonas gave a sudden laugh from the cradle. Ruby, startled by her brother, dropped her cloth and laughed too. The sound broke through the kitchen. Wade looked at them. His hand slipped from the pan. Laurel smiled before she could stop herself. "They have been waiting for you to come home." Wade swallowed. "They don't know enough to wait. They know your boots on the porch." That touched him. She saw it in the way his eyes shifted toward the floor, as if he had to look away before something inside him showed too clearly. Outside, a horse whinnied. Wade turned toward the window. A rider had entered the yard. Not the man from the ridge. This one was older, bent slightly in the saddle with a gray mustache and a patched coat. He rode a bay mare with one white sock and no hurry left in her bones. Wade opened the door before the man knocked. "Silas," he said. The older man removed his hat. "Thought I'd see if you needed hands before the next cold settles." Wade stepped aside. "I always need hands, can't always pay for them." Silas Granger gave a dry little laugh. "Good thing I always need coffee more than coins." He came in with the easy manner of someone who had known the house before sorrow changed it. But the moment he saw Laurel, his humor slowed. His eyes moved from her face to the children, then to the rearranged kitchen. Wade's voice hardened a little. "This is Laurel Whitcomb. She is helping with Ruby and Jonah's for now." "For now." Laurel heard it, so did Silas. But the older man was kinder than most. He only nodded. "Ma'am." "Laurel is fine," she said. Silas hung his hat near the door and washed his hands without being asked. Then he crouched beside the cradle. "Well, look at you two. Last time I saw you, both of you were mad as wet cats." Ruby stared at his mustache with deep suspicion. Jonas grabbed it. Silas winced, then chuckled. "Strong boy." Wade almost smiled again. "Almost." Laurel poured coffee for Silas. As she set the cup down, she noticed the old ranch hand studying the sheet hanging near the stove, the rolled cloth at the door, and the cradle's new place. "You did this?" he asked. "Yes." "Good sense." Wade glanced at him. Silas shrugged. "Cold don't care what room a man prefers, it goes where it can." Laurel liked him immediately. For the next hour, Silas helped Wade split wood and repair the loose shutter outside the kitchen window. Laurel stayed inside with the children, but she heard pieces of their talk through the wall. "Who was on the North Ridge this morning?" Wade asked. Laurel stilled, a cup in her hand. Silas answered after a pause. "You saw him too." "No, did you?" "Boot tracks near the cottonwoods, fresh. Horse stood there a while." Wade's voice dropped. "Harlan Pike. Could be one of his men." The name settled into the kitchen like cold ash. Harlan Pike. Laurel did not know him, but she knew the sound of a name spoken with dislike and caution. Men like that existed in every territory. They smiled at church doors, lent money at cruel terms, and waited for widows, drunkards, or exhausted fathers to lose what they could not defend. Wade came back inside later with snow on his hat and Silas behind him. Laurel did not admit she had overheard, but Wade seemed to know by the way she avoided his eyes. "You saw someone this morning," he said. Laurel dried her hands slowly. "On the ridge. He left after you went to the barn." Wade's mouth tightened. "Should have told me. I was not sure what I saw. This is my land." "And those are your children," Laurel replied, glancing toward the cradle. "I chose not to frighten the house over a shadow." Wade looked ready to argue, but Silas cut in gently. "Harlan Pike has been sniffing around since Martha passed. Says he wants to buy the East Meadow. Says Wade cannot manage the place alone." "I did not say I could not manage it," Wade said. Silas looked at the kitchen, the babies, the burned mark still black on the stove lid from the night before. "No one said you did." That silence was heavier than any answer. Laurel did not speak. She was beginning to understand the shape of Gray Hollow's trouble. It was not only grief. It was not only winter. It was a ranch watched by men waiting for one weakness too many. That evening, after Sela's rode to check the lower barn, Laurel asked Wade where the cellar was. His eyes narrowed. Why? Because if snow comes early, the children cannot eat pride. He stared at her. The line was too bold. She knew it the moment it left her mouth. But she did not take it back. Wade moved toward the cellar door beside the back wall. I have food stored. I believe you. Then why ask? Because stored food and safe food are not always the same. Wade opened the door with a hard pull. You plan to teach me ranching too? No, Laurel said, only winter. They descended the narrow steps with a lantern between them. The cellar smelled of earth, apples, and damp boards. At first glance, the shelves looked full. Potato sacks lined one wall, onions lay in crates, squash rested near the corner, jars stood in rows, every one labeled in Martha's careful hand. Wade lifted the lantern higher, satisfied. Laurel did not answer. She crossed to the potato sacks and knelt. One potato had sprouted pale and long in the dark. Another felt soft beneath her thumb. A crate of apples sat too tight together, one bruised fruit bleeding rot into the next. The onions near the wall had damp skins. A sack of cornmeal rested directly on the floor, where moisture had begun to creep through the bottom seam. Laurel's chest grew tight. It was not neglect, not exactly. It was a tired man storing food the way he remembered it being stored, without seeing that winter had already started eating from the corners. Wade saw her face. What? She lifted the soft potato and broke it open. The inside was watery and faintly gray. Wade's expression changed. That sack was good last week. Maybe some of it still is. She moved the lantern toward the wall. Moisture darkened the boards behind the crates. Wade stepped closer, and the anger went out of him so quickly it left only fear. That's our winter. No, Laurel said softly, that is what winter has already taken, the rest we can still save. He looked at the shelves, the jars, the labels in his dead wife's hand. Martha kept this cellar better than any house in the valley. I believe she did. Then why is it failing? Laurel looked at him for a long moment before she answered. Because Martha is not here to check it anymore. The words hurt him, she saw it, but they were not cruel, they were true. Wade turned away, one hand braced against the shelf. Laurel wanted to apologize, but pity would shame him more than truth. So she picked up the lantern and said, bring empty crates, we sort tonight. Tonight. Rot does not wait until morning. For the next 2 hours they worked by lantern light. Laurel separated the sound potatoes from the spoiled ones. She spread onions where air could reach them. She wrapped good apples one by one in scraps of clean paper. Wade carried ruined food outside with a face as grim as burial. Sela's returned and helped raise the cornmeal off the floor on old boards. At one point, Wade stood holding a jar of dried apples, his thumb resting on Martha's label. Laurel saw the grief catch him. She took a piece of charcoal and wrote a small mark on the back of the tag, leaving Martha's words untouched. Use hers, she said, add only what helps. Wade looked at the label. For the first time, he did not seem to feel that Laurel was taking something from his wife. Maybe, just maybe, she was helping him keep what Martha had left. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because sometimes saving a family begins with noticing what everyone else has stopped seeing. Near midnight, when the cellar was finally sorted, Laurel carried the lantern up the steps. Wade followed her, tired and silent. At the top he stopped. On the kitchen table lay a folded paper that had not been there before. Wade picked it up. His face darkened as he read. Laurel watched his hand close around the page. What is it? She asked. Wade lifted his eyes toward the window, toward the dark ridge beyond the glass. Harlan Pike, he said. He says if I cannot pay what I owe before the first deep snow, he will claim the East Meadow. Laurel felt the warmth leave the room. Behind them, down in the cellar, half the winter stores had just been saved. But above them, the ranch itself had begun to slip from Wade's hands. Wade held Harlan Pike's notice so tightly the paper bent in his fist. The kitchen fire snapped softly behind him. Ruby and Jonas slept in their cradle near the stove, both tucked under the blue star blanket Laurel had found in the little room. The house had grown warm since morning, but the words on that page made the air feel thin again. Laurel stood by the cellar door, her hands still smelling faintly of earth and spoiled potatoes. "How much?" she asked. Wade did not answer at first. That was answer enough. Silas stepped closer, wiping his hands on a rag. "Read it plain, Wade." Wade's eyes moved over the paper again, though Laurel knew he had already memorized every line. $340, he said, due before the first deep snow blocks the north road. Laurel did not know much about land papers, but she knew enough about money to understand that $340 might as well have been a mountain to a widowed rancher with 2 babies, weekend stores, and winter at the door. Silas let out a low whistle. "That ain't a neighborly debt, that's a trap." Wade's face hardened. It was Martha's doctor, the coffin, feed bought on credit last March, a note against the East Meadow until spring. "And Pike bought the note," Silas said. Wade looked down at the paper. "He bought it from Laramie Mercantile last week." Laurel moved to the table and pulled out a chair. Why would a man buy another man's debt unless he wanted something more than money? Wade folded the notice slowly. "Because the East Meadow has the only spring on this side of the ridge that runs clear through summer." Silas nodded. "Without that meadow, Gray Hollow ain't a ranch, it's a house with fences." Laurel looked toward the dark window. She remembered the rider on the ridge, the way he had waited and watched. Harlan Pike was not just hoping Wade failed, he was measuring how soon it would happen. "When is the first deep snow?" she asked. Wade gave a tired laugh without humor. "If I could answer that, I'd be richer than Pike." "Then we must act before it comes." Wade repeated. The word struck him differently this time. The night before, it had slipped from Laurel's mouth like kindness. Now it sounded like a claim, and Wade was not ready to hear it. Laurel saw his guard rise. She softened her voice. "I mean the ranch," she said. "The children, the house, whoever is here has to think past tonight." Wade looked away, ashamed of the anger that had almost risen in him. "I have cattle I can sell. In winter. Before winter fully sets." Silas shook his head. "You sell in a hurry, Pike's men will hear of it before the cattle reach the road. They'll offer half what they're worth and call it mercy." Wade pushed back from the table and stood. "Then I'll ride to town myself." "In the dark?" Laurel asked. "I've ridden in worse." "And if Pike is waiting for you to leave the children and the house thin-handed?" Wade turned sharply. "You think I should sit here while he takes my land?" "No," Laurel said. "I think a desperate man is easiest to lead where his enemy wants him." The words landed hard. Wade walked to the stove and braced one hand on the mantel. Above it hung a small framed sampler stitched in blue thread. Laurel had noticed it earlier but had not read it closely. "A home is kept by many hands." The stitching was Martha's. Wade stared at it as if the answer should have been there. Silas cleared his throat. "There may be another way." Wade turned. "If you had another way, you should have said it before Pike bought the note." "I didn't know he had bought it." "What way?" Silas hesitated. That hesitation made Wade's eyes narrow. "Laurel," Silas said gently, "maybe you should check the children." "I can hear the children from here." Wade looked between them. "Say it." Silas removed his hat and turned it slowly in his hands. Martha kept a second ledger. The room went still. Wade's face changed in a way Laurel could not name. Anger, grief, confusion, and fear all passed through him at once. "No," he said. "She did," Silas replied. "I saw her writing in it more than once, not the barn ledger, not the account book you know about, a smaller one." Wade's voice lowered. "Where?" I don't know. You expect me to believe my wife hid business papers from me. Silas met his eyes. I expect you to remember that Martha was practical and you were gone with cattle 3 weeks at a time. She kept things running whether you noticed or not. Wade's pride flared, but it had no strength behind it. He knew Silas was right. Laurel stayed silent. This was a door that belonged to his marriage, not to her. But the locked bedroom waited at the far end of the hall, and she knew they were all thinking of it. Wade followed her glance. No, he said again, quieter this time. Silas did not press. Laurel did not either. The babies stirred. Ruby whimpered. Laurel crossed to the cradle and tucked the blanket more securely around her, careful with the stitched star. Jonas opened his eyes for a moment, then settled when Laurel touched 2 fingers to his small palm. Wade watched. The paper notice lay on the table between them like a stone. After a long silence, Laurel said, "If Martha kept a ledger, perhaps it was not hidden from you. Perhaps she was waiting for the right moment to explain it." Wade gave her a wounded look. "You didn't know her." "No," Laurel said, "but I have known women who carried burdens quietly because the men they loved already carried too much." That silenced him. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind pushed snow dust across the yard. At last, Wade took the lantern from the hook. "Fine," he said, "we look, but only for the ledger, nothing else is moved." Laurel nodded, "Nothing else." Silas stayed in the kitchen with the children while Wade and Laurel walked down the hall. The floorboards creaked under Wade's boots. At the locked bedroom door, he stopped and pulled the key from his pocket. Laurel saw his hand tremble once before he steadied it. He unlocked the door. Cold air breathed out. The room smelled of cedar, dust, and old lavender. Martha's shawl still hung behind the door. Her brush sat on the washstand. A pair of small baby socks lay unfinished in a basket beside the bed, one blue and one white, as if she had meant to return after supper and never did. Wade stood at the threshold. Laurel waited behind him. "You don't have to come in," she said. "Yes," he answered, though he did not move. "I do." He stepped inside. The lantern light moved across the room in slow gold. It touched a dress folded over a chair, a Bible on the bedside table, a stack of clean cloths, and a wooden trunk at the foot of the bed. Wade knelt before the trunk but did not open it. His hand rested on the lid. "She packed that for spring," he said. "Said when the thaw came, she wanted to take the babies to Sheridan so her mother could see them." Laurel said nothing. "She never made it to spring." His voice almost broke on the last word. Laurel looked down, giving him the small dignity of not being watched. After a moment, Wade opened the trunk. Inside were folded dresses, baby clothes, a cracked hair comb, and a packet of letters tied with string. No ledger. They searched slowly, carefully. Laurel touched only what Wade handed her. She opened no drawer without his nod. Beneath the sewing basket, they found thread, buttons, 2 silver thimbles, and a scrap of cloth with measurements written along the edge. Nothing. Wade grew more restless with every empty place. "She would have told me," he muttered. "Maybe she meant to," Laurel said. He turned toward the bedside table. The Bible lay there, thick and worn, with papers tucked between some of the pages. Wade lifted it like it might cry out in pain. Several pressed flowers fell into his hand. Then a folded paper. He opened it. Not a ledger, a list. Seed potatoes, East Meadow spring flow, 3 calves owed from Ramsey, Pike offered too low. Wade's eyes sharpened. "Ramsey," he said. Silas's voice came from the doorway. He had come down the hall quietly, leaving the babies asleep. "Tom Ramsey." Wade nodded. "Martha wrote 3 calves owed from Ramsey." Silas frowned. "That was for the bull service 2 years back. I thought he paid." Wade looked at the page again. "Not according to Martha." Laurel leaned closer but did not touch the paper. "Would 3 calves help with the debt?" "Not enough," Wade said, "but it would prove Pike is not the only man owed something." Silas scratched his chin. If Martha kept that note, there may be more. They searched again, this time with a purpose that felt less like trespass and more like listening. Laurel found it by accident. The small white sock in the sewing basket felt heavier than it should. She paused, then held it out to Wade. There is something inside. Wade took it, confused. From inside the unfinished sock, he pulled a narrow key tied to a blue thread. His breath caught. Silas stepped forward. What does it open? Wade stared at the key. I don't know. The answer brought a chill into the room deeper than the weather. They checked the trunk lock. Not that. The desk drawer. Not that. The small cedar box on the washstand. Not that either. Then Laurel noticed the floorboard. Near the bed, under the edge of the rug, one plank sat a finger's width higher than the rest. It was not loose from neglect. It had been lifted before, carefully, many times. Wade followed her gaze and went pale. He knelt, worked his pocketknife beneath the edge, and raised the board. Underneath sat a flat tin box. The narrow key fit. Inside was Martha's second ledger. There were no love letters, no hidden shame, no secret betrayal. Only neat columns, receipts, names, dates, seed plans, cattle notes, and careful sums written by a woman who had been holding the ranch together long before anyone gave her credit. Wade turned page after page, his face changing with each one. Martha had listed money owed to Gray Hollow, feed overcharged by Laramie Mercantile, 3 calves from Tom Ramsey, a payment Pike had accepted but never marked against Wade's note. A copy of that payment receipt was folded into the back. Wade sat down hard on the edge of the bed. He lied, he whispered. Silas took the receipt and held it to the lantern. Not just lied. If this is true, Pike's claim is short by nearly $100. Laurel felt hope rise, cautious but real. Wade looked at the ledger, then at the room around him. His grief had not lessened, but something inside it had shifted. Martha had not vanished from this house. She had been waiting under a floorboard with proof in her own hand. For the first time in months, Wade spoke to the empty room. I'm sorry, he said softly. I should have known how much you carried. No one answered. But the lantern flame bent gently toward the bed, and for a moment Laurel felt as if the house itself had exhaled. By morning, the plan was set. Silas would ride to Tom Ramsey at first light. Wade would take Martha's receipt to the county clerk before Pike could file a claim. Laurel would stay with the children and continue setting the house right for winter. But just before dawn, a heavy knock struck the front door. Wade opened it. A man stood on the porch in a black coat dusted with snow, his hat brim low and his smile thin as a knife. Behind him waited the same dark horse Laurel had seen on the ridge. Harlan Pike, Wade said. Pike's eyes slid past Wade and landed on Laurel. So it's true, he said, you've taken in a stranger. His smile widened. That may make the court question whether your children are safe under this roof. Harlan Pike stepped into Gray Hollow's doorway as if the cold itself had put on a black coat and learned to smile. Wade did not move aside. The two men faced each other with the threshold between them, one standing inside the warmth of a wounded home, the other standing outside with snow dust on his shoulders and a folded paper in his gloved hand. Behind Wade, Laurel felt Ruby stir in the cradle. Jonah's gave a soft little sound, then settled again beneath the blue star blanket. Pike's eyes moved across the kitchen, taking in everything. The sheet hung to hold heat near the stove, the rolled cloths at the doors, the jars on the shelf with Martha's labels turned neatly forward, the cradle close to the fire, Laurel standing near it with one hand resting lightly on the rail. His smile sharpened. Well, Pike said, this house looks different. Wade's voice stayed flat. Say your business. My business is protection. Pike lifted the folded paper. The valley has been talking, a widower alone with 2 infants taking in an unknown woman off the road. No kin, no references, no church record here. It raises concern. Laurel felt heat climb her neck, but she kept her chin steady. She had known men like Pike, men who could turn hunger into laziness, grief into failure, and kindness into sin if it helped them gain $1. Wade's hand tightened on the door. "My children are safe," he said. "Are they?" Pike looked past him again. "You said the same when your stores were failing. You said the same when your fences went down last spring. You said the same when you missed 2 payments." Wade took one step forward, careful. Pike's eyes gleamed. "Careful is exactly what I am asking you to be. The county takes an interest when children are kept in unstable conditions." Laurel's stomach tightened. There it was. Not just the land, the children. Pike had found the softest place to press. Silas came from the hallway, his old boots quiet on the floor. He had Martha's ledger wrapped in a cloth and tucked beneath one arm, hidden from Pike's sight. His face showed no fear, only the slow anger of an old man who had seen too many bullies dress greed in proper language. "Harlan," Silas said, "you ride early for a man with no honest chores." Pike tipped his hat. Silas Granger, still living on other men's coffee. Better than living on other men's trouble. Wade spoke before Pike could answer. "Leave." Pike unfolded the paper with calm hands. "I will leave after I make you an offer." "No. You have not heard it. I know enough." Pike looked toward the cradle. "Then think of Ruby and Jonas while I say it. Sign over the east meadow before the first deep snow and I will mark your debt settled. Keep the house. Keep the barn. Keep the memory of a ranch if that comforts you." The words struck the room. Laurel saw Wade's shoulders go rigid. The east meadow held the spring. Without it, Gray Hollow would limp for a year, maybe 2, then die slowly. Pike knew it. That was why he offered mercy with poison inside it. "No," Wade said. Pike's smile faded only a little. "Pride is expensive. So is theft." The room went still. Pike's eyes narrowed. "You should be certain before using that word." Wade reached into his coat and pulled out Martha's receipt. Pike's expression did not change at first, but Laurel saw his gloved fingers close around the paper he carried. "This payment was never counted," Wade said. "Martha kept proof." For the first time, Pike looked less like a man in command and more like a man who had stepped on loose ground. "Martha was a fine woman," he said slowly, "but grief can make widowers misunderstand old papers." Silas gave a dry laugh. "That receipt has a clerk's mark on it. Clerks make mistakes. And cheats count on snow to hide tracks," Silas replied. Pike's eyes turned cold. Laurel stepped closer to the cradle, though no one had moved toward the children. Her hand found Ruby's blanket and held the edge. The little white star brushed her thumb. Pike noticed. "You care for those babies as if they were yours," he said. Laurel met his gaze. "I care for them because they need care." "And what does Wade Mercer give you for that care?" "Shelter. Only shelter." Wade's face darkened. "That is enough." Pike looked satisfied, as if Wade had just helped him. An unmarried woman sleeping under a widower's roof, raising his children for shelter. The county may view that poorly. Laurel's breath caught, but she forced herself not to look ashamed. Shame was what Pike wanted. Shame made people bend their heads and accept chains just because the chains had polite words engraved on them. Wade opened the door wider. "Get off my porch." Pike took one slow step back, but his eyes stayed on Laurel. "This is not finished. The clerk will hear of the conditions here, so will Mrs. Mercer's mother." At that, Wade went still. Laurel saw it clearly. Pike had saved the deepest cut for last. Martha's mother. The children's grandmother. A woman with grief of her own and legal kinship that Laurel could not match with warm milk and clean blankets. Pike placed his hat more firmly on his head. "Storms have a way of revealing weakness, Wade. I suggest you decide what you are willing to lose." He turned, crossed the porch, and mounted his dark horse. No one spoke until the sound of hooves faded down the frozen road. Then Ruby began to cry. Not loudly, not fearfully, just a small hungry cry, ordinary and innocent, as if the world had not just shifted beneath the floorboards. Laurel lifted her. The child rested against her shoulder and quieted almost at once. Wade watched, and the fear Pike had planted showed in his eyes. "He will write to Beatrice," Wade said. Silas nodded. "Maybe he already has." "Would she listen to him?" Laurel asked. Wade rubbed one hand over his face. "Beatrice Crowell loved Martha more than she ever trusted me. She blamed me for waiting too long to fetch the doctor." Laurel said nothing. He looked at her. She was not entirely wrong. The confession settled gently but painfully between them. The fire popped. Wade turned away, but not before Laurel saw the old wound break open in his face. A man could survive guilt for a long time by burying it beneath work, but Pike had put a shovel straight into the grave. "You could not know how quickly a fever would turn," Laurel said. Wade's voice came low. "I knew she was worse by morning. I told myself the road was too muddy, told myself she needed rest, told myself a dozen things because I did not want to leave her with newborns while I rode for help." He looked toward the locked bedroom down the hall. "When I finally went, it was too late." Laurel held Ruby closer. She wanted to say he was forgiven, but it was not her place. She wanted to say Martha would understand, but she had not known Martha, so she gave him something smaller and truer. "You stayed because you loved her," Laurel said. "You rode because you loved her. Grief makes both choices look wrong after the person is gone." Wade closed his eyes for a moment. Silas looked down at the floor. No one had spoken that kindly to Wade's guilt in a long time. Maybe no one had known how. By afternoon, the house returned to motion because sorrow never stopped chores for long. Laurel fed the children. Silas rode to check whether Pike had gone toward town or the North Road. Wade sat at the kitchen table with Martha's ledger, the receipt, and the debt notice spread before him. Laurel watched him try to read the same numbers 3 different ways, but anger blurred his thinking. She placed a cup of coffee beside him. "You need a clear list," she said. "I have a ledger. You have grief written over the top of it." He looked up. She pulled a scrap of brown paper from beside the stove and sat across from him. "What does Pike say you owe?" $340. "What proof does Martha show?" "A payment of $95 never counted." "What else is owed to you?" 3 calves from Tom Ramsey, maybe $20 from the freight man for hay, $2.40 from Holly's Reed for a broken plow chain Martha mended with our iron. Laurel lifted her brow. She wrote down $2.40. She wrote down everything. "Then she is still helping." Wade's eyes lowered to the ledger. "Yes," he said quietly, "she is." Together they made the list, not as husband and wife, not even as trusted friends, but as 2 tired people trying to hold a ranch together with proof, patience, and the careful work of a dead woman's hand. When Silas returned near dusk, he brought news. "Pike rode toward Sheridan," he said. "If he keeps pace, Beatrice may hear his version before yours." Wade rose at once. "Then I go tonight." "No," Laurel said. Both men looked at her. The word had come sharper than she intended, but she did not soften it. "No," she repeated, "that is what he wants. He wants you on the road, angry and alone with snow coming. He wants the house short-handed. He wants witnesses to say you left 2 infants with a stranger while you chased him." Wade stared at her, breathing hard. Silas nodded slowly. "She is right." Wade struck the table with his palm. Ruby startled and began to fuss. He froze at once, shame crossing his face. Laurel soothed the child without scolding him. That made the shame worse. "What do I do then?" he asked. "Wait while Pike poisons every ear between here and town." Laurel looked at the papers, then at the shelf with Martha's labels. then at the sampler over the stove. A home is kept by many hands. You write first, she said, not to defend your pride, to tell the truth before Pike dresses it up. Wade gave a bitter breath. I am no letter writer. Martha was, Silas said gently. The room quieted. Laurel looked toward the little room, where the unopened letter still waited beneath the blue blanket. Wade followed her eyes. His face tightened. I can't, he said. Laurel did not ask him to. She simply rose, walked to the little room, and returned with the envelope. She held it out carefully, as if carrying a candle through wind. Wade stared at his name written in Martha's tired hand. For Wade, if I cannot say it myself. His fingers trembled when he took it. The children were quiet, the stove glowed red. Outside, the first light snow of evening began to tap against the window. Wade opened the letter. He read the first line. Then his face changed completely. Laurel knew, before he spoke, that Martha had left more than love on that page. Wade sank into the chair, the letter shaking in his hands. What does it say? Silas asked softly. Wade looked at Laurel with tears standing in his eyes. She knew about Pike, he whispered, and she wrote what to do if he ever came for the children. Wade held Martha's letter, as if the paper had become a living thing in his hands. For several moments he could not read beyond the first few lines. His eyes moved, stopped, returned, and moved again. The kitchen seemed to draw in around him. Even the stove quieted, its red belly glowing behind the iron door while snow whispered against the window. Laurel stood near the cradle with Ruby asleep against her shoulder. Silas remained by the table, hat in hand. No one hurried Wade. Some words had to cross a man's heart slowly, especially when they came from someone buried under frozen ground. At last, Wade swallowed and began to read aloud. My dearest Wade, if this letter has found your hands, then I did not get the chance to tell you everything plain. Do not blame yourself first. You always do that. You think every broken fence, every sick calf, every storm cloud belongs on your shoulders. It does not. His voice cracked. Laurel looked down at Ruby, giving Wade room to gather himself. He continued. If Harlan Pike comes near this ranch after I am gone, do not meet him with anger. He uses anger better than honest men use tools. Meet him with proof. In the tin box under the floorboard you will find the second ledger. I kept it there because Pike asked too many questions when you were away, and I did not trust the smile he wore when he thought no one was looking. Silas muttered, that sounds like Martha. Wade's thumb rubbed the edge of the letter. She knew, he said almost to himself, she knew all this time. Then he read again. If Pike questions your right to keep the children, send for my mother before he does. Do not let him be the first voice she hears. She is hard because she is afraid, not because she does not love you. Tell her the babies need family, not a fight. Tell her I love this ranch, but I loved my children more. If you need help raising them, accept it. Do not let pride make orphans of children who still have a father. The last sentence struck Wade like a hand against the chest. He lowered the letter. The room blurred in his eyes. Laurel felt the power of those words reach every corner of Gray Hollow. Martha had known him too well. She had known the pride, the guilt, the habit of carrying pain alone until it turned into danger for everyone near him. Wade looked toward Ruby and Jonas. I did, he whispered. I almost did. Laurel did not answer. She only shifted Ruby higher against her shoulder, the child warm and steady. Silas pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. There more. Wade nodded and read on. There is one more thing. If a woman ever enters this house with gentle hands and honest eyes and the children are safer because of her, do not punish her for not being me. No woman can wear another woman's place without it becoming a burden, but a good woman can build her own place if you let her. Laurel's breath caught. Wade stopped reading. The words sat between them with a tenderness so sharp it almost hurt. Laurel looked away first. She had no claim to such a sentence. Martha had written it before Laurel ever came to the door, before the burned milk, before Ruby's first quiet breath against her chest. Yet it felt as if the dead woman had reached across time and placed a hand gently on the fear everyone in the room had been too careful to name. Wade folded the letter once, then opened it again, unable to close it completely. "There is a postscript," he said. His voice was barely above the stove's hush. "If my blue star blanket is still whole, keep it with the babies. My mother made it when I was small. Tell her I kept it. Tell her I never stopped needing her, even when I tried to act grown. That may soften her heart more than any argument." A long silence followed. Then Silas cleared his throat and looked toward the little blue blanket tucked around Jonah's in the cradle. "Well, that settles one thing. Beatrice Crowell needs to hear from us before Pike reaches her." Wade nodded, but his face showed the same trapped look as before. "If I ride, Pike wins the story he wants. If I stay, Beatrice hears his lies first." "Not if someone else goes," Laurel said. Both men turned to her. She adjusted Ruby in her arms and kept her voice calm. "Silas can ride." Silas straightened. "I can." Wade frowned. "The North Road is rough." "I have ridden rough roads since before you learned which end of a saddle points forward," Silas said. Laurel looked at the papers on the table. "He should take copies if you can make them, the receipt, a list from the ledger, a letter from you, and Martha's words about the blue blanket." Wade's eyes moved to the letter in his hand. "I am not sending Martha's letter over rough country." "No," Laurel said, "you do not need to. Write only what matters. Tell Beatrice the original is here for her to read." Wade gave a faint, pained laugh. "You talk like writing a letter is as easy as mending a blanket." "It is not easy," Laurel said, "but neither is losing children because silence got there first." That ended the argument. They worked by lamplight. Silas brought a crate to the table, turned it over, and used it as a writing surface for the papers that would need to dry. Wade sat with a pen in his hand as if it were a branding iron. 3 times he began. 3 times he scratched out the first line. Dear Mrs. Crowell felt too cold. Dear Beatrice felt too bold. Mother felt impossible. Laurel warmed milk for Jonas, fed him slowly, then came to stand beside the table. Start with Martha, she said. Wade looked up. Not with Pike, not with debt, not with fear. Start with what her daughter left behind. Wade stared at the blank page. Then he began again. Beatrice, Martha left a letter for me. In it, she asked that I send for you before Harlan Pike could turn grief against this house. His writing was rough, but the words were true. Laurel did not lean over his shoulder. She did not correct every sentence. She only helped when he stopped and could not find the next honest line. He wrote about the twins. Ruby's cough. Jonah's eating better when fed slowly. The blue star blanket still with them. He wrote that a widow named Laurel Whitcomb had taken shelter at the ranch and had helped without touching Martha's place in the house. He wrote that Pike had threatened the East Meadow and had spoken of the children in the same breath as debt. Then he stopped. The pen hovered above the paper. Laurel waited. Wade's jaw tightened. I do not know how to ask her to come without sounding like I am begging her not to take them. Then do not beg, Laurel said. Invite her to see the truth with her own eyes. Wade looked at her for a long moment. Then he wrote, If you believe I have failed them, come and judge me yourself, but do not let Pike judge this house for you. Silas gave a low nod. That will reach her. I hope it reaches her before he does, Wade said. By midnight, the letter was finished. Silas wrapped the receipt copy, the debt list, and Wade's letter in oilcloth. He would leave at dawn before the wind rose. Laurel thought the house might rest then, but winter had its own way of reminding people that paper solved only one kind of danger. Ruby woke coughing. It began softly, just one little sound against the quiet, then another. Laurel crossed the room quickly and lifted her. The child's cheeks felt warm, but her hands were cool. Her breathing rattled just enough to make Laurel's heart tighten. Wade was beside her in an instant. "What is it?" "Cold air near the floor," Laurel said, "and the room is still too wide." "The fire is hot." "The fire is not the whole room." She handed Ruby to Wade and knelt near the cradle. A draft slid along the floorboards from the back wall, thin but steady. She held her damp finger near a crack and felt the cold find it. Silas crouched beside her, old chinkings loose. "Can it wait until morning?" Wade asked. Laurel looked at Ruby, who was trying to sleep against his shoulder but kept coughing. "No." They worked without complaint. Silas mixed clay, ash, and straw scraps into a rough paste, while Wade pressed rags into the worst cracks near the floor. Laurel moved the cradle farther from the wall and hung another sheet from the ceiling hooks to make the warm space smaller. She placed a shallow pan of water near the stove so the air would not bite so dry. Wade watched every step this time. No anger. No wounded pride. Only attention. When Ruby's cough eased near dawn, Wade looked more relieved than if a sheriff had ridden in with Pike's debt torn in half. Silas left as the first gray light touched the yard. Snow lay thin over the ground, but the road was still open. He tucked Wade's papers inside his coat and tied his scarf high across his face. "Do not stop at Pike's place," Wade told him. Silas smiled. "I am old, not foolish." Laurel handed him a wrapped piece of bread and salt pork, for the road. He accepted it with a nod. "You keep him from riding after trouble." "I will try." "You do more than try, ma'am." Then he was gone, his horse stepping into the pale morning, leaving a line of dark tracks toward Sheridan. Wade stood on the porch until Silas disappeared beyond the cottonwoods. Laurel came to stand beside him, wrapping her shawl tight around her shoulders. The cold smelled of snow and iron. "He will get there," she said. Wade nodded, but his eyes stayed on the empty road. "Pike will not stop." "No," Laurel said, "men like him do not stop when truth appears, they hurry." Wade turned to her. "You have known men like him." It was not a question. Laurel looked across the yard toward the barn. A loose strip of canvas flapped softly near the hay door. "A man named Orson Vale owned the homestead where I worked after my husband died. He spoke kindly when others listened. When no one listened, he reminded me I had no family, no money, and no witness worth naming." Wade's face darkened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not in the way you mean." The answer was quiet, but it carried enough pain that Wade did not push. "He took my wages 3 months running," she said. "Said room and food cost more than my labor. When he sold the land, he told the new owners I was troublesome. By morning, I was told to leave." Wade looked away, anger working through him. "That why you came with only a carpet bag?" "Yes." "And still you knocked on a stranger's door." Laurel gave a small, tired smile. "I was choosing between fear and cold. Fear at least sometimes opens a door." Wade looked at her then, truly looked, not as the woman who had quieted his children or sorted his cellar, but as someone who had been forced into courage by a world that gave her no softer choice. "I am sorry," he said. She did not know what to do with the words. Most people told her to be grateful she had survived. Wade said he was sorry, as if what had happened to her had mattered. So she only nodded. That afternoon, Laurel began what she called a winter listening. She walked the house with a candle, watching where the flame bent. She pressed her hand against walls, doors, and window frames. She checked the cellar again, then the pantry roof where dust had shaken loose near the stovepipe. Wade followed her. "What are you doing now?" "Seeing where winter enters before it announces itself." He looked up at the pantry ceiling. "That roof has held 15 winters." "Then it is tired." He almost argued, then stopped. The change in him was small, but Laurel felt it. Yesterday, he would have defended the roof because he had built it. Today, he looked where she looked. Together, they found frost around the nails on the north wall. A soft place near the lower sill, a roof beam above the pantry that gave a faint groan when the wind pressed from the west. Laurel made a list on the back of a torn flour sack. Wade read it over her shoulder. That is more work than two people can do before snow. Then we choose what matters first. The roof. The children first, then the food, then the path to the barn, then the roof. The path to the barn. Laurel set down the pencil. In a whiteout, a man can lose his own porch. Wade shook his head. Not here. She looked at him. Could you find the barn with your eyes closed while snow is cutting your face and wind is turning you around? He did not answer. That evening, after the children slept, Wade carried 2 long coils of old rope into the kitchen and dropped them by the stove. Laurel looked at them. He shrugged. If we are listening to winter, we may as well hear everything it has to say. For the first time since she had arrived, trust did not come as silence. It came as rope on the floor. And outside, high over the western ridge, clouds were building in a dark line that looked less like weather and more like a warning. By morning, the clouds over the western ridge had grown heavy enough to make the whole valley feel lower. The light came late and weak. It touched the windows in a dull gray sheet, not gold, not warmth, only warning. Horses stood with their tails turned to the wind. Cattle gathered close to the barn fence before Wade even drove them there. The old rooster, usually loud enough to wake the dead, stayed silent beneath the wagon tongue with his feathers puffed wide. Laurel saw all of it from the kitchen window, while Ruby and Jonas sat on a quilt near the stove, passing a wooden spoon between them as if it were treasure. Wade came in from the yard, bringing the smell of cold leather and hay with him. Silas won't make it back today, he said. Laurel did not look surprised. No. He may reach Sheridan before the storm closes the road. May, she said softly. Wade pulled off his gloves one finger at a time. You think Pike will reach Beatrice first. I think Pike rides with less honesty but more speed. That was the truth neither of them wanted to say. Wade looked toward the north road. It was still open, but the horizon had begun to disappear behind low-moving snow dust. Somewhere beyond that distance, Silas carried Wade's letter, Martha's proof, and the hope that Beatrice Crowell would listen before Harlan Pike poisoned her grief. Inside the house, Laurel refused to let waiting become helplessness. She tied her apron, set coffee on the stove, and began the day's work. First came the children. Ruby's cough had eased after the draft was sealed, but Laurel was not willing to trust one quiet night. She moved the cradle deeper into the warm space, hung another sheet between the kitchen and hall, and folded 2 wool layers beneath the sleeping pad so cold would not rise through the floor. She kept the top open and clear, checking with her hand to make sure the air did not grow damp. Jonas watched her seriously, chewing his fingers. You look like a banker judging a loan, she told him. Wade, standing by the woodbox, gave a quiet breath that was almost laughter. Laurel glanced at him. Careful, if you smile too much the roof may not know you. His mouth softened, then tightened again, though not as hard as before. Roof already knows me. It complains every time the wind turns. Then today we answer it. Wade followed her gaze toward the pantry ceiling. Last night the beam above the stovepipe had creaked twice under gusts from the west, not breaking, not failing, speaking. Laurel had learned that danger rarely began with a crash. It began with a sound people explained away. After breakfast, Wade carried the babies, cradle near the stove, and made certain they were settled before stepping outside with Laurel. The cold struck their faces the moment they opened the door. They worked first on the guide rope. Wade drove tall stakes from the back porch toward the woodshed, then another line toward the barn. Laurel measured the spacing by touch rather than sight. Every few feet, she tied a thick knot large enough for a gloved hand to feel in blowing snow. At the first knot nearest the porch, she tied a strip of faded blue cloth from the hem of her old dress. Wade watched her fingers work. Why there, he asked. So a man coming home knows he has reached the beginning. The porch is the beginning. Not in a whiteout, she said. In a whiteout, the rope is the only thing that tells the truth. He said nothing after that. They stretched the line tight, then added a second support to the middle post. Wade tested it with his weight, pulling hard enough that the rope hummed in the cold air. From the road, a man's voice called out, "Well, if that ain't the prettiest leash I ever saw." Laurel turned. Holly's Reed rode into the yard with his coat collar high and his hat pulled low. He was a thick-shouldered neighbor with a round face, a red nose, and the kind of grin that always arrived before kindness and left before help. He had 2 ranch hands behind him, both younger, both trying not to laugh. Wade's shoulders stiffened. Holly's pointed at the guide rope, Gray Hollow planning to tie itself down and wait for spring. Laurel kept looping rope around the stake. "It may help in a whiteout," Wade said. The young hands exchanged looks. Holly's chuckled. "A man who can't find his own barn ought to sell the barn." Wade's face darkened, but before he could answer, Laurel stood and dusted snow from her gloves. "Could you find yours with your eyes shut?" she asked. Holly's blinked. "What?" "Your barn from your back door, in wind, with snow hitting your face hard enough to blind you." He laughed again, louder now because his men were watching. "Ma'am, I was born on this land." "Laurel was asking about your feet," Wade said quietly, "not your birth record." That silenced the young hands. Holly's looked at Wade, surprised less by the words than by the fact that Wade had spoken them for her. Laurel returned to the rope. Nobody has to use it unless the storm proves pride can see in blowing snow. Holly's grin faded. "Pike told me you took in a sharp-tongued widow." Wade stepped forward. "Pike talks too much. He also says Beatrice Crowell is coming for the babies." The words struck hard. Laurel did not move, but her fingers tightened around the rope. Wade's face went still. "He said that. Said he was doing what Martha would have wanted." Wade's voice dropped. He never cared what Martha wanted while she was living. Holly's shifted in the saddle. For the first time, he looked uneasy. A man could mock ropes and sheets and cellar bins, but the dead changed the sound of a conversation. Laurel looked up at him. Did Pike also mention he took money off Wade's debt and forgot to count it? Holly's frowned. "No." Strange thing to leave out. One of the young hands glanced at the other. Holly's looked at Wade. "You got proof?" "Martha did," Wade said. The answer was simple, but it carried enough weight that Holly's did not laugh. He turned his horse slightly toward the road. "Storm may pass north." "It may," Laurel said. "And it may not," Wade added. Holly's looked at the rope again, then the hay stacked near the north wall, then the covered woodpile Wade and Laurel had finished before noon. "You feeding the house hay now too?" he asked, trying to recover his humor. Laurel picked up a hammer, only the side that feels the wind first. Holly's gave one last snort, but it lacked the strength of his first laugh. He rode off with his men behind him, leaving hoofprints that were half filled by wind before they reached the gate. Wade watched him go. "I should have told him to get off my land." "You did better," Laurel said. "How?" "You stood with the truth before anger got hold of you." He looked at her then, and something in his expression changed. Not grandly, not like a man struck by sudden love. It was smaller and steadier than that. A quiet recognition that her courage was not loud because it did not need to be. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing what could still be prepared. The hay wall against the north side of the house needed raising. Wade stacked the bales too close to the wall at first, but Laurel stopped him. "Leave a hand's width of air. Air is cold. Still air guards warmth, wet hay steals it." She showed him how to set flat stones beneath the bottom layer so meltwater could pass under. She covered the top with canvas sloped away from the cabin. When one corner sagged, Wade noticed before she did and rebuilt it without argument. Laurel hid her smile by bending over the rope. By dusk, the house looked strange from the yard. Ropes stretched like lifelines through the blowing snow dust. Hay bales guarded the north wall. Canvas covered the wood. The roof rake leaned beside the porch, long and awkward, made from two lodgepole poles and a crosspiece tied firm with rawhide. It did not look pretty. It looked ready. Inside, the babies had grown restless. Jonas had pulled himself against the chair leg and stood wobbling for 3 full breaths before falling back onto the quilt. Ruby clapped at him with both hands, then looked around as if expecting the whole world to clap too. Wade saw it from the doorway. His tired face opened. He stood, he said. Laurel lifted Jonas under the arms. He did, then he sat with great drama. Wade knelt, holding out his hands. Try again, son. Jonas stared at him, solemn and round-cheeked. Then he grabbed Wade's thumbs and pulled himself upright. For a moment, father and son faced each other. Wade's mouth trembled. Ruby reached for his sleeve, demanding equal notice. Wade laughed then, quietly but truly, and lifted her too. Both children leaned into him, pulling at his beard, his collar, his grief, and somehow making room for breath underneath it. Laurel turned toward the stove, pretending to check supper. She did not want to intrude on that moment. But Wade looked over Ruby's head and caught her eyes. "You gave this back to me," he said. Laurel shook her head. "No, they were waiting for you to have both hands free." He did not answer, his eyes did. After supper, the first heavy flakes began to fall. They came slowly at first, soft against the dark window, then faster, then sideways. The wind rose behind them, not yet wild but gathering itself. Laurel checked the cellar one last time, potatoes in shallow layers. Onions hung dry, squash off the floor. Apples separated, cornmeal raised, dried beans covered. Martha's labels remained, and Laurel's small charcoal marks sat on the backs of tags like quiet footsteps beside them. In the kitchen, Wade stood at the table with Martha's letter open again. He had read it several times that day. Not because he needed the instructions now, Laurel thought, but because he needed to hear her forgive the future before he stepped into it. "Beatrice will come," he said. Laurel closed the cellar door. "Yes." "You sound sure." Martha knew how to reach her. Wade traced one line with his finger. "If a woman ever enters this house with gentle hands and honest eyes." Laurel looked away. He folded the letter carefully. "I do not know what to do with that part." "You do not have to do anything tonight. But one day." Laurel stood very still. The storm tapped harder against the glass. "One day," she said, "you will have to decide whether you are keeping me here because the house needs hands or because your heart has made room." Wade absorbed the words as if they frightened him more than Pike, more than debt, more than the coming blizzard. "And you?" he asked quietly. Laurel's voice softened. "I will have to decide whether I believe a room given in kindness can become a home without being taken away again." Neither of them moved. Ruby and Jonas slept beneath the blue star blanket. The stove glowed low. The guide rope outside swung faintly in the wind, its knots disappearing one by one under blowing snow. If you believe a home can be rebuilt after loss, hold this story close, because the storm has only begun to test what these people are becoming. Near midnight, hoofbeats sounded beyond the yard. Wade went to the window. Laurel lifted the lantern. Through the falling snow, a horse stumbled into view. Its rider bent low over the saddle, one arm wrapped around the horn like he could barely hold himself upright. Wade threw open the door. The rider slid from the horse and collapsed against the porch post. It was Sila's. His coat was crusted with ice, his lips were pale, in one shaking hand he held Wade's oilcloth packet. But in the other he carried a second letter. Wade caught him before he fell. Silas forced his eyes open and looked toward Laurel. "Beatrice is coming," he whispered, "and Pike is with her." Silas's words seemed to freeze in the doorway before the storm could carry them away. "Beatrice is coming." And Pike is with her. Wade pulled Silas inside with one arm under the old man's shoulders. Laurel hurried to shut the door against the snow, but not before a hard gust shoved white powder across the kitchen floor. The lantern flame bent nearly sideways. Ruby stirred in the cradle. Jonas gave one sharp cry. "Help me get him by the stove," Wade said. Laurel moved quickly. She spread a blanket on the floor near the warmth, not too close to the iron, then knelt beside Silas as Wade eased him down. His gloves were stiff with ice. His scarf was frozen where his breath had touched it. Snow had packed into the cuffs of his coat and around the tops of his boots. Laurel did not waste words. "Wade, dry socks, the brown wool ones from the shelf. Bring warm water, not hot, and another blanket." Wade obeyed without arguing. Silas tried to speak again, but Laurel placed 2 fingers lightly against his wrist. "Breathe first." "Letter," he rasped. "The letter can wait 1 minute." Pike lied. "That can wait too." Silas's eyes found Wade. "No, it cannot." Wade crouched beside him, holding the cup Laurel had filled with warm water. "Drink first, old man." Silas took 2 small sips, shivering so hard the cup knocked against his teeth. Laurel pulled off his gloves carefully. His fingers were red and stiff but not white. That gave her some relief. She rubbed them dry with a coarse towel, then wrapped them loosely. Wade unfolded the second letter Silas had carried. The paper had been sealed once, then broken open in haste. The handwriting was strong and slanted, sharper than Martha's soft script. "Beatrice Crowell." Wade read in silence. Laurel watched his face. At first there was fear, then confusion, then something like hope struggling against caution. "What does she say?" Laurel asked. Wade swallowed. Silas reached her before Pike. Silas managed a weak nod. "Barely." Wade read aloud, his voice low. "Wade Mercer, Silas Granger came to my door with your letter, Martha's proof, and the word my daughter left for me. Harlan Pike arrived less than an hour later wearing concern like a church coat. He said the children were neglected, that a stranger had taken Martha's place, and that you were near losing the ranch. I am coming to see for myself. Until I do, no man will speak for my daughter in my hearing." Laurel closed her eyes for one brief moment. Martha's words had reached their mark. Wade continued. "I do not come to fight you. I come to judge the truth. If the children are unsafe, I will act. If Pike has used my grief for his own gain, he will find I am not as easy to lead as he believes." Wade lowered the letter. For the first time since Pike had stood at the door, his shoulders loosened. Laurel took the paper from him only when he offered it. She read the last line for herself. "Keep Martha's blue blanket ready. I want to see it." Laurel looked toward the cradle. Ruby and Jonas lay beneath that very blanket, the little white star near Ruby's cheek. Silas gave a rough breath. She left Sheridan with Pike because he insisted the road was safer with his driver. I told her to wait. She said if her grandchildren were in danger, she would not sit by a stove and guess at it. Wade stood in this storm. "She started before the worst of it," Silas said, "but the wind turned while I was coming back." Laurel rose and went to the window. Nothing showed beyond the glass but snow pressed white against darkness. The yard had vanished. The barn had vanished. Even the porch railing came and went in broken glimpses. "How far behind you?" Wade asked. Silas closed his eyes, remembering. "Maybe 4 hours when I left the Ridge Road, but Pike's carriage is heavier. If they stayed on the road, they may be stuck near Crow Creek by now." Wade grabbed his coat from the peg. Laurel turned. "No." He froze, one sleeve already in his hand. "That is my children's grandmother out there." "And your children are in here," Laurel said. "Silas is half frozen. The storm has covered the yard. You cannot ride blind into open country because fear tells you to move." Wade's jaw tightened. "I cannot leave her to die in a ditch." "No one said leave her." Laurel crossed to the table and pulled the rough map of the ranch from beneath Martha's ledger. "We think first, then we move." Silas opened his eyes. Crow Creek Road passes the east meadow. Wade looked down at the map. There is an old line cabin near the meadow fence. With a broken roof, Silas said. But the spring cut runs beside it, Wade said. If the carriage drifted off the road, the horses would fight the bank there. Laurel listened, building the place in her mind from their words. Road, creek, meadow, line cabin, open land, heavy carriage. A woman coming to judge the truth and a greedy man guiding her through a storm he likely did not respect. What signals do you use in the valley? She asked. Wade looked at her. If someone is lost close enough to hear, she said, how do ranches call each other? Gunshots usually, Silas said, then glanced at the sleeping children. But shots in this weather may sound like branches cracking. Bells? Laurel asked. Wade nodded slowly. There is a dinner bell outside the barn. Martha used to ring it when hands were in the far field. Can it be moved? To the porch, he said. Laurel pointed toward the guide rope. Then we do not search the whole valley. We make home louder, rope to the barn, bell to the porch, lanterns shielded from wind. If they are close enough, they may come toward sound and light. Wade shook his head, and if they are not close enough, then you and Silas cannot find them by guessing either. The truth hurt, but it held. Wade looked toward the cradle. Ruby had woken and was watching him with wide, dark eyes. Jonas slept with one fist tucked against his cheek. The blue blanket rose and fell softly over them. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. Then he hung his coat back on the peg. Tell me what to do, he said. Those 6 words changed something in the house. Laurel heard it, Silas heard it. Maybe even Martha's sampler above the stove seemed to stand straighter. Wade Mercer, who had once nearly refused a starving widow shelter because pride was the last wall he knew how to hold, had finally chosen wisdom before action. They moved fast. Wade and Laurel dragged the dinner bell from the barn porch to the house, following the guide rope with one hand at all times. The storm had already swallowed the path. Without the rope, the distance between house and barn felt like miles. Snow struck their faces so hard Laurel had to turn her cheek into Wade's shoulder just to breathe. At the porch, Wade tied the bell to the beam. Its first ring cracked through the storm, dull but steady. Laurel tied a lantern inside a glass-fronted box and set it low near the porch steps, where wind could not blow it out. Another lantern went in the kitchen window, turned toward the north road. A third was placed near the barn door. Every few minutes, Wade rang the bell. Not wildly, not in panic. 3 slow rings, a pause, 3 more. Come home. Come home. Come home. Silas, wrapped in blankets, insisted on sitting upright by the stove with a cup in his hands. If I hear wheels, I will know. You can barely hear your own teeth, Laurel said. He gave her a faint grin, then talk less and let me listen. Even Wade almost smiled. Hours stretched. The storm worsened. Near midnight, the roof began to complain. At first, it was only a low creak above the pantry. Then a sharper sound followed, like a board shifting under a heavy boot. Laurel looked up at once. Wade followed her eyes. Old snow, she said. We cleared it. From the kitchen side, not the pantry lean-to. Wade's face tightened. I forgot the lean-to. The bell rope in his hand went still. Laurel heard the guilt begin to rise in him, ready to drag him backward into every old failure. She caught his wrist. Not guilt, she said, action. He stared at her. Not guilt, she repeated, action. He nodded once. They could not climb the roof in that wind. Instead, Wade took the long snow rake and worked from the porch, pulling weight from the lean-to a little at a time. Laurel held the guide rope with one hand and his belt with the other whenever gusts shoved him sideways. Snow fell in heavy sheets, striking the ground with dull thuds. Inside, Silas rang the bell from his chair with a rope Laurel had tied through the window latch. 3 slow rings. A pause. 3 more. The roof groaned once, then eased. Wade lowered the rake, breathing hard, his face white with cold. Laurel pushed him inside before his hands stiffened. Ruby was crying now, upset by the bell and the wind. Laurel warmed a smooth river stone near the stove, wrapped it carefully in cloth and placed it near the cradle, not touching the children. Wade dried his gloves, then took Jonah's when he woke, holding him clumsily at first, then closer. The house had become a small island of light, sound, and stubborn care. And still Beatrice did not come. Near dawn, the bell rope trembled in Silas's hand. He lifted his head. Everyone went still. Again, from somewhere beyond the storm, came a sound. Not wind. Not a branch. A horse. Then a faint cry. Wade was on his feet. Laurel grabbed his coat and shoved it into his hands. Rope first, no running blind. They tied themselves to the guide line from porch to barn, then added a second coil from Wade's waist to Laurel's. Silas was too weak to go, but he stood at the window with the bell rope in hand, ringing 3 times over and over. Wade and Laurel stepped into the whiteout. The world vanished at once. Snow filled Laurel's eyes, nose, mouth. The rope beneath her glove became the only certain thing left. Wade moved ahead, slow and braced, calling into the wind. Beatrice. Nothing. Then a horse screamed. They found the first animal near the edge of the yard, not on the road at all. It had broken loose from a carriage trace and stumbled toward the bell. Its reins dragged beneath its chest. Snow had crusted across its mane. Wade caught the bridle. "Carriage is close," he shouted. Laurel could barely hear him. They followed the horse's tracks backward, but the wind erased them almost as quickly as they appeared. The rope from Wade's waist tightened. Their porch line would not reach much farther. Then Laurel saw it. Not the carriage. A dark shape half buried beyond the old cottonwood stump. Wade plunged forward, pulling the safety line until it stretched hard. The carriage lay tilted in a drift, one wheel sunk deep, the driver's bench empty. A second horse stood tangled in the traces, trembling. Inside, someone pounded weakly against the door. Wade tore it open. Beatrice Crowell sat inside, wrapped in a black wool coat, her face pale but her eyes sharp with life. Snow had blown through a cracked panel and covered her lap. Beside her, Harlan Pike crouched low, one arm wrapped in a scarf, his fine hat gone. Beatrice looked past Wade and saw Laurel. For one frozen heartbeat, the two women stared at each other. The grandmother who had come to judge. The widow who had stayed to protect. Then Beatrice spoke, her voice shaking from cold and anger. "If you are Laurel Whitcomb," she said, "then stop standing there and help me out of this fool's carriage before I freeze beside the man who lied to me." Laurel did not waste the breath to answer Beatrice Crowell. She stepped through the cutting snow, caught the older woman beneath one arm and helped Wade pull her from the broken carriage. Beatrice's boots sank nearly to the ankle in the drift. She tried to stand straight, proud even in the middle of a blizzard, but her knees shook from the cold. "I can walk," Beatrice said. "Then walk with one hand on my arm," Laurel replied. "Pride has no eyes in this weather." Beatrice gave her a sharp look but obeyed. Behind them, Harlan Pike struggled out of the carriage with one arm tucked close to his ribs. His coat was torn near the shoulder. Snow clung to his hair and lashes. Even half frozen, he still had enough vanity to look angry that anyone had seen him frightened. "My horse," he snapped, "the trace is caught." Wade turned toward the trembling animal. Laurel tightened her hold on Beatrice. "Wade." He looked back. The guide rope from his waist to Laurel had gone tight. The porch line would reach only so far. Beyond it, the storm became open country again. One wrong step, one gust, one moment of lost direction, and the whole rescue could turn into another tragedy. Wade understood. He looked at Pike. "Can you stand?" Pike's face darkened. "I said the horse is caught. And I asked if you can stand." Pike opened his mouth, then shut it. The wind shoved him sideways and he grabbed the carriage door to stay upright. Wade made his choice. Animal first if we can do it safe, people first if we cannot. Laurel saw Beatrice watching him. She was not a soft woman and she had not come ready to forgive, but she saw what Laurel saw. Wade was not moving from anger now, he was thinking, choosing, measuring the living weight in front of him. The man Martha had asked him to become was standing in the storm. Wade tied the loose horse to the safety line first, then cut the trapped trace from the second horse with his knife. He worked close to the carriage, never stepping beyond reach. Pike complained twice that the harness was expensive. Wade ignored him both times. When the second horse finally lurched free, Laurel pulled Beatrice toward the yard, one slow step after another. The bell rang through the storm. 3 times. A pause. 3 more. Silas was still calling them home. Beatrice heard it and gripped Laurel's sleeve harder. That bell. It is for you, Laurel said. For me. For anyone trying to find the house. Beatrice looked toward the white emptiness where Gray Hollow should have been. I cannot see it. No, Laurel said, that is why we built the rope. She placed Beatrice's gloved hand on the line. The older woman's expression changed the instant her fingers closed around it. Not gratitude, not yet, something more honest. Understanding. Step by step they followed the guide rope back. Wade came behind with Pike and the 2 horses, stopping twice when Pike stumbled. No one spoke much, words froze too fast, breath mattered more. At last the porch appeared from the snow like a ship out of fog. The lantern glowed low near the steps, the bell swung from the beam. The blue cloth tied to the first knot slapped in the wind, faded but visible, marking the beginning of home. Silas threw the door open from inside. Get them in, he called. Warmth rushed over them. Laurel guided Beatrice to a chair near the stove. Wade pushed Pike inside after her, then shut the door with his shoulder. For a moment, all of them stood breathing hard while snow melted from their coats onto the floor. Ruby began crying from the cradle, startled by the sudden rush of cold and bodies. Jonas woke and joined her at once. Beatrice turned at the sound. Everything else left her face. She rose too quickly, stumbled, then caught herself on the table. My babies, she whispered. Laurel stepped back. That was not her moment to take. Beatrice crossed to the cradle and bent over Ruby and Jonas. Her hands hovered first, as if she were afraid to touch them and find them changed. Then she lifted Ruby with a sound that was half sob, half prayer. Ruby stared at the stranger, uncertain, then touched the black buttons on Beatrice's coat. Jonas, not wanting to be left out, kicked hard beneath the blue blanket. Beatrice saw the little white star. Her face crumpled. Martha kept it, she whispered. Wade stood by the door, hat in hand, snow dripping from his hair. She said to tell you she never stopped needing you. Beatrice closed her eyes. Laurel watched the older woman hold Ruby against her cheek. This was grief with a face, not the hard judgment Pike had carried into it, not the fear that had driven Beatrice through a blizzard. Just a mother holding the child of her dead child, realizing love had been kept warm in a house she thought had forgotten. Pike ruined the silence. This does not change the matter, he said. Everyone turned. He stood near the stove with one arm held close, his face pale but his pride still walking ahead of him. The fact that the children are alive after a storm does not prove this home is proper, he said. A rope and a bell do not make a fit household. Silas looked at him from his chair. No, but they made a road for your sorry hide. Pike ignored him and faced Beatrice. Mrs. Crowell, you have seen enough. A woman of unknown standing is managing your daughter's house. Wade Mercer is drowning in debt. The ranch is unsafe and the children would be better under your roof. Beatrice held Ruby tighter. Laurel felt the old fear rise in her. She knew how this worked. A man like Pike did not need truth if he could make his voice sound official. He could stand in someone else's kitchen, dripping melted snow onto their floor and speak as if he owned the judgment of God. Wade stepped forward, but Beatrice lifted one hand. "Let him speak," she said. Pike looked encouraged. Then Beatrice turned her sharp eyes on him. "I have listened to you since Sheridan," she said. "You told me the children were coughing in cold rooms." "They were." Wade flinched. Laurel did not hide it. Ruby was coughing when I arrived. The kitchen was losing heat through open rooms and floor drafts. We changed that. Beatrice looked around. "I see." Pike pressed on. "You told me, Mrs. Crowell, that Martha would never have allowed strangers to touch her stores, her nursery, her blanket." Laurel's hands folded tight in front of her. Beatrice looked toward the shelves. She saw the labels, Martha's handwriting untouched. She saw new charcoal marks on the backs of tags not covering the old words. She saw the blue blanket around Jonah's. She saw the sheet walls, the warmed stones wrapped safely away from the children, the clean cloths, the careful order that did not erase Martha but worked beside her. "My daughter believed a home was kept by many hands," Beatrice said. Pike's jaw tightened. Wade went to the table and brought Martha's ledger, the receipt, and the letter. He laid them before Beatrice. "I should have sent for you sooner," he said. "I let shame speak louder than need. Martha knew I might. She tried to help even after she was gone." Beatrice handed Ruby gently to Laurel. The motion startled everyone, including Laurel. But Ruby settled against Laurel's shoulder without fear, and Beatrice saw that too. The older woman sat at the table and opened Martha's ledger. No one moved while she read. Outside, the storm kept beating against the north wall, but the hay barrier held. The protected nails near the stove stayed clear of frost. The pantry roof, lightened of snow, no longer groaned. In the cellar below them, sorted food waited safe in the dark. Every preparation Laurel had been mocked for now stood as quiet witness. Beatrice read the receipt twice. Then she looked at Pike. "You told me Wade had ignored his debt." "He has missed payments," Pike said. "You did not tell me one payment was accepted and not counted. That matter is disputed." "My daughter did not dispute carelessly." Pike's eyes hardened. "With respect, grief may make you see what you wish to see." The room went dangerously still. Beatrice rose. She was smaller than Pike, older than Pike, and half frozen from the storm he had led her into. But when she spoke, every person in the room heard Martha's strength in her voice. "Do not use my grief against me again." Pike said nothing. Beatrice continued. "You came to me saying my grandchildren were in danger, yet you drove me into a blizzard before the worst of it passed. You spoke of concern, but you cared more for Wade's land than for whether the carriage horses could hold the road. You called this house unsafe, but the rope you mocked brought us back. You called this woman unfit, but she is the only reason my grandchildren are warm under their mother's blanket." Laurel's eyes burned. Wade looked at her, and this time he did not look away. Pike's mouth twisted. "A touching speech does not erase debt." "No," Wade said, "proof does." He tapped Martha's receipt. Silas sat forward, and when the road clears, the county clerk will see all of it. Pike's expression shifted. The storm had trapped him in the very house he wanted to weaken, surrounded by the very witnesses he had hoped to turn against Wade. Laurel saw the calculation in his eyes. He was not defeated, not yet. Men like Pike did not fall in one moment. They looked for another corner to cut. Before he could speak, a deep cracking sound came from outside. Every head turned. Another crack followed, louder. Wade moved to the window. The glass showed only blowing white, but the sound came again from the direction of the barn. "The old cottonwood," he said. Silas pushed himself up. "If that tree falls toward the barn roof, it will take the calving stall." Laurel looked toward Beatrice. "Belle is due soon." Wade's face drained. "She may already be in labor." The ranch had survived the first test. The house stood. The children were warm. Beatrice knew the truth. But the storm was not finished. taking measure of Gray Hollow. Wade reached for his coat. This time, Laurel reached for hers too. Beatrice set her jaw and handed Ruby back into the cradle beside Jonah's. Then she lifted the edge of Martha's blue blanket, tucked it around both children, and turned toward Laurel. "Tell me where to stand," she said. Outside, the old cottonwood cracked again, and somewhere in the barn, a cow cried out into the storm. The old cottonwood cracked a third time, and the sound rolled through Gray Hollow like a warning bell made of wood. Wade pulled on his coat. Laurel wrapped her shawl tighter beneath hers, then tied the ends so the wind could not tear it loose. Beatrice stood near the cradle, one hand on Martha's blue star blanket, her eyes moving between the sleeping babies and the storm beyond the door. "You stay with them," Laurel said. Beatrice's chin lifted. "I can help." "You will," Laurel answered, "by keeping the fire steady, the cradle warm, and Sila's sitting down if he forgets he nearly froze." Sila's, already trying to rise from his chair, sank back with a guilty look. Beatrice studied Laurel for one sharp moment, then nodded. "Go then." Wade looked at Pike, who stood near the stove with one arm still held close. "You stay inside," Wade said. "You have done enough damage for one night." Pike's face tightened. "If your barn falls, that is your failing, not mine." Wade opened the door. Snow rushed in. "Then keep warm while my failing shelters you." He stepped out before Pike could answer. Laurel followed, one hand already finding the guide rope. The storm struck so hard it stole her first breath. Snow flew sideways, biting at her cheeks and filling the dark between house and barn until nothing existed but rope, wind, and Wade's shape ahead of her. The bell behind them rang once as the door shut. Then again. Beatrice was ringing it. Not 3 times now, not a rescue call, but slow and steady, a heartbeat from the house. Laurel kept one hand around the rope and the other near Wade's coat. They moved step by step toward the barn. The guide line shook under the force of the wind. The blue cloth at the porch not vanished behind them. The lantern by the barn door appeared, disappeared, then appeared again like a star fighting to stay alive. Another crack split the air. Wade turned his head, trees leaning. Laurel could barely hear him, but she saw it when they reached the barn. The old cottonwood beside the calving side had split down the middle. One heavy limb rested against the roof edge. The main trunk leaned toward the stall where Belle was lowing in distress. Inside the barn, the air was colder but calmer. Cattle shifted restlessly. Horses stamped in their stalls. Belle lay in fresh straw, sides heaving, eyes wide and frightened. Laurel knelt near her, careful not to crowd. "She is close." Wade looked toward the wall as another gust shoved the broken tree against the roof. Snow sifted through the rafters. "If that trunk drops," he said, "it will crush this side." "Can we move Belle?" "Not safely if she is already calving." Laurel looked around fast. The prepared warming crate stood near the inner wall, lined with burlap and raised from the floor. Bundles of cottonwood branches, dried corn stalks, and emergency fodder hung from pegs. The roof rake leaned by the door. Everything they had made, everything others had mocked, now waited for the moment it had been built to meet. "Then we protect the stall from inside," she said. Wade stared at her. "With what?" "Rails, feed trough boards, anything that can brace the roof long enough." They worked quickly. Wade tore loose spare rails stacked beside the tack wall. Laurel dragged empty grain chests and packed them tight beneath the weakest beam. Together they set 2 long posts at an angle under the sagging section. Wade hammered wedges into place with the back of an axe. The barn groaned. Belle cried out. Laurel dropped the rope she had tied around her waist and went to the cow. "Wade." He turned. "The calf is coming." For one moment, the tree, the storm, Pike, Det, Beatrice, and the whole ranch seemed to gather inside Wade's face. A month ago, he would have tried to fight every danger at once until one of them broke him. Now he took one breath. "Tell me what you need." "Clean towels, warm water from the covered pail, fresh straw, and keep her head steady." Wade moved. No pride, no protest. Only trust. Belle labored while the storm threw itself against the barn. Laurel spoke softly to the cow, her hand firm along the animal's neck. Wade knelt in the straw, one shoulder already aching from lifting beams, but he did not complain. Snow hissed through a crack near the roof and melted in his hair. The calf came after a long, hard struggle. A small heifer, wet and still. For one terrible heartbeat, no one moved. Then Laurel leaned close and rubbed hard with the towel. Breathe, little one. Wade looked stricken. Laurel. Dry her. She is not moving. Dry her, Laurel said again, sharper now. Wade obeyed. He rubbed the calf's side while Laurel cleared the little nose and mouth with a clean cloth. Belle stretched her neck, lowing weakly, trying to reach her baby. Outside, the cottonwood cracked again. The roof beam dropped half an inch. Wade looked up. Not now, Laurel whispered, but she was not sure whether she spoke to the roof, the storm, or God. Then the calf shuddered. A small breath came. Then another. Wade froze with the towel in his hands, his eyes wide. Laurel laughed once, a broken little sound full of relief. There you are. They dried the calf until her coat no longer clung flat to her skin. Wade lifted her carefully into the warming crate, keeping the wrapped stones beneath the bedding where they could give heat without burning. Laurel made certain the vents stayed open so damp air could leave. The crate did not replace Belle. It only bought the tiny life enough time to gather strength. The barn shook. This time the tree did not only crack. It began to fall. Wade grabbed Laurel by the arm and pulled her back. The cottonwood crashed against the roof with a sound that swallowed the storm. Boards split. Snow burst through the opening. One brace snapped. The angled posts Wade had set bent under the blow held, then shuddered. But they did not fail. The main weight slid off the roof edge and slammed into the snow outside the wall. For a moment the barn filled with flying dust, straw, and cold white air. Then silence. Not full silence, the storm still raged, the cattle still shifted, Belle still breathed hard. But the barn stood. Wade looked at the braces, then at Laurel, then at the calf in the crate breathing in small, uneven pulls. You were right, he said. Laurel wiped snow and straw from her face. About which part? All of it. That might have been the first time Wade Mercer had ever given such an answer. By the time they returned to the house, both were soaked, shaking, and covered in straw. Beatrice opened the door before they reached the porch. Her face searched theirs first, then looked past them toward the barn. Belle, she asked. Alive, Wade said, calf too. Beatrice closed her eyes, and her hand went briefly to her chest. Pike sat near the stove, pale and silent. He had heard the crash. He had likely imagined the barn falling, the ranch weakening, his claim growing stronger. But Wade and Laurel had walked back from the storm with proof that Gray Hollow was harder to break than he had believed. Morning came slowly after that. The blizzard finally loosened its grip near sunrise. Wind fell to a tired moan. Snow stopped hitting the windows and began sliding softly from the roof edges. The world outside the house had changed into white hills and buried fences. Gray Hollow looked battered. But it stood. The north wall held its warmth behind the hay barrier. The pantry roof, though damaged near the lean-to, had not collapsed. The barn had a torn corner but no lost cattle. Belle nursed her calf by mid-morning, and the little heifer stood for 3 trembling seconds before folding gently back into the straw. Inside, Ruby and Jonas woke warm beneath Martha's blanket. Beatrice lifted them both, one at a time, checking fingers, cheeks, breathing, and eyes. Ruby patted her face with a serious little hand. Jonas caught one of her collar buttons and refused to let go. The grandmother who had come to take them sat down slowly by the stove and cried without making a sound. Laurel turned away, giving her privacy. But Beatrice reached for her sleeve. Do not leave the room, she said. Laurel stopped. Beatrice looked at her through tears she did not try to hide. I came here believing I would find my daughter's place stolen." Laurel's throat tightened. Beatrice looked toward the shelves, the cradle, the blue blanket, the neat winter room, and the charcoal marks added carefully beside Martha's order without covering it. "I found it guarded," she said. Wade stood by the table with Martha's ledger open in front of him. Silas sat wrapped in 2 blankets, holding coffee with both hands. Pike stood near the door now, his fine black coat dried stiff and his face drawn with defeat he was trying hard not to show. Beatrice turned to him. "When the road clears, I will ride with Wade to the county clerk," she said. "You will explain why Martha's receipt was not counted." Pike lifted his chin. "That is a matter of records." "Then records will answer it." "And the children?" Pike asked, one last attempt in his voice. Beatrice's eyes turned cold. "The children are home." The words landed harder than any shout. Pike looked at Wade. "You still owe money." Wade nodded. "Some, not what you claimed." Silas raised his cup. "And Tom Ramsey owes 3 calves." Laurel added quietly, "And Holly's owes $2.40. For one strange second, the room nearly smiled. Even Beatrice's mouth softened. Pike saw the change and understood what he had lost. Not only a meadow, not only a dead advantage, he had lost the loneliness he had counted on. Gray Hollow was no longer a tired widower standing alone in a failing house. It was Wade, Laurel, Silas, Beatrice, Martha's proof, 2 warm children, a living calf, and a home full of many hands. That was harder to take than land. When the road opened 3 days later, Pike left with his arm bound, his pride wounded, and his story broken before he could tell it. Beatrice stayed. Not for a week as she had first planned, but through the thaw. She mended baby clothes beside Laurel in the evenings. She taught Ruby the little finger rhyme Martha had known as a child. She argued with Wade about coffee, church manners, and whether Jonas needed shoes before he could properly walk. And slowly, in the work of ordinary days, grief stopped standing between them like a locked door. One afternoon, Beatrice opened Martha's room again. This time, she did not enter like a judge. She entered like a mother. Laurel waited in the hall until Beatrice called her in. The room was still quiet, still full of Martha's touch, but dust no longer felt like a command to keep away. Beatrice lifted the unfinished wedding quilt from the trunk and placed it in Laurel's hands. "My daughter began this for the babies," she said. "She did not finish it." Laurel held the quilt carefully. "I can keep it safe." "I am not asking you to keep it in a chest." Beatrice's voice softened. "I am asking you to finish the stitches." Laurel's eyes filled. "I do not want to replace her thread." "You will not," Beatrice said. "You will add yours beside it." That evening, Laurel sat by the stove, finishing the border Martha had begun. She used the same blue thread where she could and a slightly lighter one where the old spool ran out. The difference was small but visible if a person looked closely. Wade noticed. Laurel saw his eyes on the stitches. "I can take them out." "No," he said, "leave them." He sat across from her, turning his hat slowly in his hands. "I spent so long trying to keep Martha's place untouched," he said, "that I nearly let everything she loved fall apart around it." Laurel's needle paused. Wade looked toward the children sleeping under the star blanket. "You did not take her place. You helped me understand that love does not stay alive by locking doors." Laurel lowered her eyes, afraid of how much those words reached inside her. Wade leaned forward. "I will not ask you to stay because I need help with the children. I do need help, but that is not the reason." The room went quiet. The fire popped once. He continued, his voice plain and steady. "I am asking you to stay because I want you beside me when spring comes, when the east meadow needs mending, when the roof needs fixing, when Ruby and Jonas take their first steps across this floor, when this house laughs again and hurts again and keeps living." Laurel's hand trembled around the needle. For 2 years, every roof over her head had felt borrowed, every meal had felt counted. Every kind word had felt like something that could be taken back by morning. She looked at Wade, then at the children, then at Martha's sampler above the stove. A home is kept by many hands. I unpacked my bag days ago, Laurel said softly. Wade smiled then. Not the small, almost smile she had seen before. A real one. Spring came late to Gray Hollow, but it came. Snow pulled back from the meadow. The spring ran clear under the thawing ice. The damaged barn roof was repaired with help from Sela's, Holly's, and two men who no longer laughed at guide ropes. Holly's even asked Laurel how far apart to tie the knots so a gloved hand could find them in a storm. She told him, and he listened. At the county office, Martha's receipt held. Pike's claim was reduced, then delayed until fair payment could be arranged after cattle sale. Tom Ramsey brought the 3 calves owed, red-faced and apologetic. Holly's paid his $2.40 in coins so shiny everyone knew he had polished them first. Beatrice returned to Sheridan with empty trunks. Before she left, she kissed Ruby and Jonah's, then held Laurel's face between her gloved hands. "My grandchildren have a mother in heaven," she said, "and they have a woman here who loves them enough to keep them warm." Laurel could not speak. Beatrice kissed her forehead anyway. Weeks later, Laurel planted seed potatoes in the East Meadow garden, using the very ones Martha had marked to save. Ruby sat in the dirt, patting mud onto her dress with great purpose. Jonah's took 3 wobbly steps from Wade's knees to Laurel's outstretched hands. Wade laughed. Laurel caught the boy and lifted him high. From the porch, the finished quilt hung in the spring light, Martha's blue thread and Laurel's lighter thread stitched side by side. Loss had not vanished from Gray Hollow, it never would. But the house no longer lived like a grave. It breathed, it warmed, it remembered, it made room. And when the wind moved softly across the meadow that evening, the guide rope swayed between the porch and barn, not as a sign of fear, but as a reminder. Some families are not saved by one grand miracle. Sometimes they are saved by a woman at the door, a blanket kept warm, a letter read in time, and many hands refusing to let love freeze in the storm. If this story touched your heart, remember to like, subscribe, and stay close for more emotional Wild West stories where kindness, courage, and truth still matter on the frontier.